Hey, I'm Sarah. If you watch my YouTube channel, then you already know that I like to experiment and play with different technologies. In this video, I'm going to explore different JSON responses that come back from Ktor's HTTP client versus Retrofit. I'll also go over missing JSON fields that can come back as a string or a numeric value, and how to handle nulls and defaults in our data classes. For this app, I'm using the Open Food Facts API. Let me show you this real quick. Here's their website, and it's an amazing resource of all sorts of food products throughout the world. And for this example, I'm going to be looking at cashews. So we can search and we get some results for all the different types of cashew products out there. And if you go to their GitHub repository, there's tons of information. If you want to learn more, you can go through, you can contribute, you can read about the API. So there's tons of information out there, but for now, I'm just going to jump right into the app. So let's go back here. So first, let's take a look at the JSON data that I'm working with. Here's a typical good response that gets the nutrition data for cashews. Now, make a note of the carbohydrates _ serving field. So here's the JSON coming back. Code, this is the actual barcode of the product. And then we have the product, the brand is Planters. And then we've got our different carbohydrate values. So for carbohydrates _ serving, we get a value of 9. And the product is found. Now in the next example, here's the response from a different product. For this one, there is no carbohydrates _ serving field, at least not in Postman and the browser, and I'll get to that in a second. So let's look at this response. So as you can see, this field is completely missing from the JSON response. And this is the Great Value brand. Now, to make things even more complicated, the next example shows the response from Retrofit. So this is just the string response. It's not serialized or anything like that. It's just what comes back in the response body. And as you can see, carbohydrates _ serving is a null string. This leaves us with 3 different scenarios. Carbs per serving returns either a number like 9 or 26, or it's completely missing from the JSON response. And finally, it could be set as an empty string. So it could be a string or a number. So how do we handle this in our apps? The answer for me was different based on which API client that I was using in my app. I prefer to use Ktor's HTTP client in my projects, but for my latest project, I decided to switch to Retrofit just to get some variety. So here's what I ran into while building my latest app, and I'll take you along on the journey. First, I'll go over the Ktor HTTP client setup, and then I'll go over Retrofit. And these are the corresponding branches if you want to follow along. I'm using Hilt in this project, and here's where I provide my Ktor HTTP client. So the engine is Android, I set my timeout, I install logging so I can get good results when I'm hitting the API, including the body string that's coming back. And finally, I install content negotiation, which is JSON, and then I just configure a couple keys here. And then from my main activity, I'm just injecting the HTTP client. And I have a really simple program here that just basically writes out to logcat so we can see what's going on. So this is the product that was incomplete and didn't have the carbohydrates _ serving value at all. And what I'm going to do here is just run this. I'm going to call Ktor client use, which is just a one-off that we can run with Ktor. I'm getting the item by the barcode, and then I'm adding a couple fields, which is brands and nutriments. So let's go ahead and run this and see what we get. All right, cool. So here's logcat, and we can see from our logging what was called. We can see the actual URL. We can see all the headers. And here is the JSON that came back. So we've got our carbs. Let's see, carbs 100, carbs unit, carbs value. So there is no carbohydrates _ serving in this JSON response. And then here I'm just printing out the body, again, from the main activity. That's what we get with HTTP client without serializing anything. Now let's go ahead and serialize all this data into a data class. And what I'm going to do for now is just comment out this block. And I'm going to uncomment this block here. And this is using, now it's getting my item response, which is an item listing. This is a data class. So let's go ahead and take a look at this. So we've got the code, the product, which could be null, and the status. And let's go into this even deeper. So under product, we have the nutriments. And under nutriments, here's where we're defining all these values. So here's my carbohydrates underscore serving. And what I've done, this is the serial name here. My value is carbohydrates. And I'm setting this as a double with the default of 0.00. So now let's go back and let's run the app and let's go ahead and serialize this JSON into the data classes. Let's rerun it. Great, so here we have our item listing. Here's the barcode. Here's the product. Now this is the data class coming back here. The brand is great value. And under carbs, we have 0.00. So this is perfect. Everything worked fine. Even though this field was not included in the JSON, our data class took over, set up a default for it, and we're looking good. So for HTTP client, that's pretty much all we need to do. Of course, there's going to be different cases depending on your API. But even with a varying JSON response, HTTP client handles it very well. And we can just set up our data class and set up defaults and have everything run smooth. Now, let's switch to the Retrofit branch and see how it handles that same exact request. So I'm going to go ahead and switch branches, Retrofit, checkout. And again, I'm using Hilt, so let's see how this is set up here. So provide Retrofit. The first thing I'm doing is creating a JSON builder. I am using the Jake Wharton extension to add Kotlin X serialization to Retrofit, so I can use that as my converter factory. So the first thing I do is set up my content type to JSON, and then I set up my JSON builder using Kotlin X serialization. And then I create a little interceptor here for logging. And I create my OK HTTP builder and I set my timeouts. And then down here, I have a base URL. I add the converter factory. And again, this is the JSON builder from this library here. So Jake Wharton, Retrofit 2, converter, Kotlin X serialization. And then I build it and I have a food API. So let me just show you that real quick. That is here and here. So I just have a couple requests and I've pretty much hard coded this one as a string. So we're getting this URL and I'm just hard coding the value that I want and the fields that I want. And then I have a couple other functions here that we'll see in a minute. So now let's go back to that main activity. And we're going to run some very similar code here. Again, it's for the same exact item and the same exact request. And the first thing we're going to do is just get the string body response. So let's go ahead. Let me stop this from the old one. And let's go ahead and run this one. Okay, so we've got our Retrofit logging here. We've got the URL that we've called, and let's see what we get back. So here's the string response, and here we go. Here's our carbohydrate serving is a null string. So again, remember in the HTTP client, we didn't have that field at all, but now it's showing up here as an empty string. All right, well, let's comment this out. And we're going to try the same thing. We're going to serialize the JSON and convert it into our data class. And this is the same exact setup that we had for HttpClient. So we can go in and we can see under here, we've got the same thing. We've got our carbohydrates and we've got our double set up. So now let's go ahead and run this, see what happens. I bet you all can guess what happens, right? Yep, here we go. We have an error because we are trying to take a null string and convert it into a double. So here we have this here. And it says failed to parse type double for input null at path carbohydrate serving. Okay, so how do we handle this in Retrofit? So let's go ahead and block this out. And what I've done here is, now there's a couple ways to do this. When you have different data types coming back, you can we could set it as a string and build workarounds for that. We could do a custom type converter. So when it comes back, when we serialize it and deserialize, we can have custom converter classes for that. I chose the simplest way that I could think of. And this is by creating a value class. So what I've done here, let's go down and look at this. So I have a value class called string double, and it takes in the JSON value, which is a string, and I'm defaulting it to 0.00. And then in here, I have just this little value here that tries to get the JSON value as a double. And if it can't, it just comes back as a 0. So it's completely type safe this way. This class is completely serializable, so we have no issues there. And what I do here in my data class is I just set the string double and I set it to, and you can be really flexible here. You can set it as a default value. You can create it null if you want to. And what's really cool about this, and which I ended up using in my app, is I can create extension functions on top of this value class. So I can say format to grams, and I can be completely type safe here. And I can either get this value as a double or just have it come back as 0 and format it accordingly. And this is really cool to have all of this type safety built in. It's super easy. I don't have to worry about custom converters or anything like that. And I really like the way it worked out. So let's go ahead. Now this version of item listing is using the different one. So it's using this value class. And let's go ahead and run this one. We'll go down and let's see what we got. So here we are. We are printing out the data class, and we've got the barcode. We've got the brand is great value, and we've got carbohydrates, and we can see that this comes back as our type safe values. And it's a little bit different than the way HttpClient handled it. So we have to handle it differently from our UI. And I can show you that in a video that I have coming up next where I actually integrate all of this stuff. But I just wanted to sort of isolate this and go through the different technologies and the different APIs and the different things that we have to face. For example, what if you're coming from Retrofit and you want to convert to HttpClient? You might need to change your code. You might be able to create things simpler. And so I think it's just really important to look at these different responses and look at these different technologies and try things out. And that's it for this video. Stay tuned to see how I'm using the Open Food Facts API to scan barcodes and return products in my Android app. And thanks for watching.